Hey everybody, and welcome to the next edition of the Soccer Fitness Goals video blog. It's been another busy week this week, and we also got some exciting news on Sunday, which was that two of the abstracts from recent research projects that myself and some other staff at Soccer Fitness have co-authored and submitted have been accepted for poster presentations at the upcoming fifth World Conference on Science and Soccer, which is happening in Rennes in France in late May and early June of this year. So these are two separate research projects. One of them involved a comparison between the treadmill training that we do in the Soccer Fitness Training Center and some different types of speed and acceleration training on the ground. And another one was an interesting study where we compared fitness assessment results and scores between some Canadian male academy players and some academy players from Uruguay, from the professional club that I worked with as a fitness coach last summer, which is actually called Canadian SC. So both of those abstracts have been accepted for poster presentations in France. And if you're watching, thank you very much to Farzad Yousefian and Jessica Triumbari, who helped with the research and getting the abstracts together. And also, of course, thank you to Rafael Carbajal, who was the head coach of Canadian SC and gave me the opportunity to work there last summer. So with that being said, and with that out of the way, today at the blog we're going to be talking about something which is a topic that's been on my mind for a long time, and a lot of it has to do with the constant amount of questions that I get and the large amount of questions that I get about nutrition for soccer players, and specifically about where carbohydrates fit into the diet of soccer players. I'm getting ready actually tomorrow to be giving a nutrition presentation with the Rush Canada Soccer Academy on this specific topic, and so I figured this was a good time also to introduce it to the blog. So we're going to be talking about carbohydrate consumption for soccer players. So there has been a ton of research looking into the intensity at which soccer is played, and we'll give just one example of a recent study that was published, and that study found that elite level male professional players play the game at an average of 70 to 80% of their maximal oxygen uptake, or VO2 max, and also at 80 to 90% of their maximum heart rate. So oxygen uptake, or the body's ability to use oxygen, as well as heart rate, or how hard the heart is working, are two pretty standard measurements of intensity. And the findings from this study are pretty consistent with findings from studies over the past 20 years that have all shown that in terms of percentage of maximal oxygen uptake or percentage of maximal heart rate, that high-level soccer is played at a very high percentage, and therefore it's played at a very high intensity. So we know that at the top level, soccer is played at a very high intensity. The next question then becomes, which foods, and specifically which of the three main macronutrients or categories of foods, and those are protein, fat, and carbohydrates, which of those three macronutrients are the best and most efficient sources of energy to provide the body with in order to perform this high intensity exercise? And the answer to that question is undoubtedly carbohydrates. Again, we'll put some information up here that comes from basic exercise physiology textbooks that shows very clearly that high intensity exercise, and specifically exercise like soccer that's performed at 70 to 80% of maximal oxygen consumption, or VO2 max, or 80 to 90% of maximal heart rate, that exercise, the only possible macronutrient that can provide the body with the energy that it needs to do that work, is carbohydrate. It comes from the breakdown of glucose, which is the singular molecular unit of carbohydrates. Fats cannot provide the body with energy to perform that kind of high intensity work, and proteins cannot provide the body with the energy to perform that work. The only macronutrient that works is carbohydrates. So we know that soccer is played at a high intensity, and we know that carbohydrates are the only macronutrient that can provide the body with fuel in order to perform this high intensity exercise. And getting a little bit more specific in terms of the physiology, muscle glycogen, which is the stored form of carbohydrates that the body keeps in its muscles and gets broken down into glucose, which then enters the body's energy system pathways to provide energy to perform exercise. So muscle glycogen, or stored carbohydrate, is really the limiting factor in terms of performance of high intensity exercise. The main thing to keep in mind with muscle glycogen is the more of it that you have, the more high intensity exercise you can perform. What we're going to do now is we're going to put up a couple of slides that are taken directly from my nutrition presentation that I'm going to give tomorrow that discuss this topic in a bit more detail. So the first slide references a study that demonstrates a linear relationship between resting muscle glycogen levels and the muscle glycogen that was used with professional male soccer players during a simulated soccer game. And basically what that means is, if there's a linear relationship, it means that as resting muscle glycogen levels go up, or the higher that they are, the more muscle glycogen that actually gets used by soccer players when they're playing soccer or when they're playing simulated soccer. So the take-home message from this study is that if you have a higher amount of muscle glycogen or stored carbohydrate, then you're giving your body the capacity or the capability to use more of that stored carbohydrate or stored energy to do work. So the next slide is actually from the same study, but it references just a different data set that was taken, which shows another linear relationship. And this time it's between the amount of muscle glycogen used and the time to exhaustion in a simulated soccer game. So keeping in mind that we know that the more muscle glycogen you have stored, the more you'll use. And now we know from this same study that the more that you use, the longer you can actually exercise in a high intensity environment like soccer before you get exhausted. So in order to prolong exhaustion, or prolong having the body run out of energy, you would need to be able to increase your storage of muscle glycogen, and that would allow you to use more muscle glycogen and to stave off or prolong exhaustion. So the final slide that we're going to have a look at is from a different study, and this one compared the effects of muscle glycogen replenishment following a 90-minute soccer game, and it compared this with two groups, one which had a normal diet and a normal or quote-unquote normal amount of carbohydrate intake, and the other which had a high carbohydrate diet. And what they found was that even though both groups initially started before the match at 100% of their resting muscle glycogen levels, when they looked at different time intervals after the match, going all the way up to 42 hours after the match, and again, that's not a lot of time, it's only a couple of days, but 42 hours later, the group with the high carbohydrate diet had only replenished their muscle glycogen about 70 to 75% back to their original level before the game, whereas the group with the regular diet, which was lower in carbohydrates, was about 10 to 15% lower in terms of muscle glycogen replenishment. This was also noted at earlier time intervals, like 24 hours prior to the match. But it's interesting to see that even with a high carbohydrate diet, you still don't get your muscle glycogen levels or your energy levels back to 100% of what they were before, but you do have a significant impact in terms of replenishing them more than you would with a diet that is lower in carbohydrates. So if we're going to summarize and look at the take-home message from all of this scientific data, it is that carbohydrates are the only source of energy that can be used for high-intensity exercise. And since soccer is performed at a high intensity, Carbohydrates are the only source of energy for soccer. And the second thing is that if you intend to recover and replenish your energy stores in order to continue to play soccer and train at a high intensity, then you need a high carbohydrate diet in order to do that, because it works much better than a diet that is low or relatively medium in terms of carbohydrate consumption. It's possible that non-athletes or people who don't exercise at a high intensity can get away with a low carb or a no carbohydrate diet. I'm not a big fan of it regardless, but I think it's possible that people that don't exercise at a high intensity can get away with it and maybe even see a little bit of weight loss and fat loss from it. But if you're a competitive soccer player that intends to train and play soccer at a high intensity, you need to have a diet which is high in carbohydrates. You have no choice. So that's it for the Soccer Fitness Goals video blog for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. We'll see you again next week, and until then, keep reaching your soccer fitness goals.